Can somebody give my sermon notes back? I've been looking for them. I was just wondering how they managed to find it, because all I have is this is my sermon note. This I normally, most of you know that I don't write my sermon, so I have this just in case of my emotional security, just to have this and very rarely look at it. But I'm glad that somebody took the time to print it out, and I would really appreciate if I could read my own notes. By the way, I just really appreciate our ministry team here. Both those women you saw, both of them, and Christy is already a doctor, Dr. Christy Cooper. Lucy is a doctoral candidate. These are the high IQ individuals I get to work with, and I could use some doctors to polish my sermons from now on. So you got to add a job description. Thank you. Thank you. Well, if you have lived in Los Angeles long enough, you must have heard this phrase at least once in your lifetime. Light, camera, action, right? Yeah. This is normally the words they utter before they make the movie. But in reality, a movie is conceptually made even before that word is spoken. And I don't know how many of you I'll give you some film lesson. Basically, a movie production is in three categories, so three stages: development, production, and post-production, right? Production is what we normally see when you say light, camera, action, and the actors start acting, camera rolling, and all of these things happen. But actually, a lot of years of work go into movie before it is actually made. It is made in the mind of the director and the producer and the writer, even before we hear the word light, camera, action, right? So I was reading about one of my favorite movies, and they were talking about it only took 2 months for them to shoot, but it took 20 years to develop. 20 years for this movie to develop, from the first meeting they had and to the moment they said light, camera, action. 20 years, right? Developing the script, finding the actors, arranging the finances, scouting the location. So many things go into it before they say light, camera, action. And there is a word in the movie business for this stage of development, and they call it development heck. Okay? I don't want to say the word because kids are here today, so you understand. They call it a development heck, because a lot of the movies die before it comes to light, camera, action. Now, the reason I'm saying this today is that Jesus had to go through 30 years of development heck before he got to come to the stage. Right? And this gospel story is a movie that unfolds in front of us where it's all about Jesus' ministry. Yes, it says a little bit about the birth narrative, and then it skips all the way to his baptism and ministry, right? In the baptism scene, we see God, the heaven opens and you hear a voice of God saying that this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. That's like saying light, camera, action. Now you go. That's where we normally start seeing this movie unfold, the gospel. But in reality, there is 30 years of development in silence, which not a lot of people talk about, right? And if you go to the internet, and if there are always speculations, what I call internet sleuths develop theories. And some people say that Jesus, as a boy, went to India and studied yoga. And some people say Jesus, as a boy, went to China and studied Kung Fu. Whatever that is. People make up theories, right? In reality, we don't really know what happened. Actually, the Quran, the Muslims, the Islamic holy book, has more information about Jesus' boyhood than in the Bible. I don't know how many of you know that the Quran speaks about Jesus very clearly, so many references. And according to the Quran, Baby Jesus spoke from the cradle. There was a scene where people come to accuse Mary of her pregnancy or why she conceived this child, and then baby Jesus gets up on the cradle and starts defending his mom. Yeah. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. That's in the Quran, not in the Bible. And then there is another episode in the Quran where actually baby Jesus makes like a bird out of the clay and let it fly. Just awesome. But most of us know that it comes from the lot of what we call apocryphal documents which were circulating at the time. There were a lot of infancy narratives, but the church fathers didn't think as authentic and never made it to the Bible. So the Quran was basically taking it and kind of reshaping it. Anyway, the point is that we don't really know what happened except for this one passage in Luke's gospel, which is what we are going to read today. And if you don't know this already, we are on a year-long journey with Jesus. And if you don't have that book already, make sure that you download and pick up a hard copy because we are going to do this together. And there are many readings this week, but I'm going to focus on this particular reading of Jesus as a boy at the temple. Would you stand with me for the reading of the word? Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 52. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. And as they were returning, after spending the full number of days, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents were unaware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan and went a day's journey, and they began looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem looking for him. Then after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When they saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you." And he said to them, "Why is it that you are looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand the statement which he had made to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. In Sunday school lessons and actually in some Bibles that I have seen subheadings for this story, and it says, Jesus lost at the temple. It kind of gives me a chuckle, First of all, the concept of Jesus getting lost is a little confusing. And also, Jesus getting lost at the temple is even more confusing. But that essentially is what we think is happening. But when you really read the story, it's not Jesus who is getting lost at the temple. It's actually his parents who are getting lost at the temple, right? So it very clearly says, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. This was an intentional decision. It was not because there was a big crowd and he didn't know where to go. He didn't see his mommy's hand. And, that's not what happened. The boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, and his parents were unaware of it, which says the parents were lost. And the boy Jesus knew exactly what he was doing, right? But it's just easier to pass the blame on to the younger generation. We always do that kind of stuff, right? We always think the next generation is getting lost, always. Baby boomers were always concerned about the Gen X people. Man, like these people are going to mess up our country, our generation, all of that. And the Gen X people, I'm from a Gen X generation, we always blame millennials. You know, the millennials are the problem. They don't know what they're doing, right? The millennials are now blaming Gen Z. They're very childish. They don't know what life is. And Gen Z, wait for your turn. The Gen Alpha is getting at a blamable age. Then you can blame them, right? So the point is, sometimes it's not just the next generation. Maybe the previous generation can get lost too. Anyway, I don't want to get into trouble for saying this. But I want you to know this, that it's the parents can get lost sometimes, right? Not the children always. But now, another thing that is interesting about this passage is that Jesus is very aware of his identity as a boy. This happens whenever I read stories about boy Jesus, speculative stories, of course, it's fictive stories, or watch movies about what Jesus as a young man, almost all the movies portray him as somebody who is in search for the meaning of life, somebody who's trying to identify his calling, and, just like us, which kind of makes sense why we portray that. But Jesus very clearly knew his identity, right? Jesus very clearly knew his identity at age 12. He said, why is that you are looking for me? Am I not supposed to be in my Father's house? He knew exactly who he was. He knew exactly where he was supposed to be, right? He didn't have to search for meaning. And it's interesting, it happens at age 12, not 13. Because according to Jewish tradition, you know that age 13 is bar mitzvah, right? Bar mitzvah is when a boy becomes an adult. So it's interesting, this happens in age 12. Jesus is still technically a boy, not exactly has become an adult, but he knew exactly what he was doing and where he was supposed to be at Father's house, right? But then, towards the end of the story, it says, even though he knew who he was, even though he was very conscious of his identity, he went back with his lost parents, went back home and subjected himself to their authority. Man, I don't know how that feels like. This boy Jesus, who knew what he was supposed to be, he knew that he knows better than his parents, but he still had to go to his parents and subject himself to them. You know, sometimes the heavenly authority and earthly responsibility, there is a fine balance. Jesus knew he had authority over his parents. Jesus knew he had authority over the entire universe, but he still kind of confined himself to a framework of earthly responsibility. That's hard to do. That's very hard to do. And his ministry starts with the baptism, as you know. He goes to get baptized by John the Baptist, and John the Baptist says, what are you doing? You should baptize me. I should not be baptizing you. And then Jesus said, no. Let it be so that it is fitting. It is fitting for us to fulfill what is righteousness, the term he used at that time. It is fitting. Even though Jesus knew and John the Baptist knew who is the boss in the story, but Jesus subjected himself to the authority of John the Baptist at that scene. And it happens all the way to the end of his ministry. He is standing in front of Pilate, and Pilate is asking these questions, and he is being silent. He is being very respectful. He is not lashing at Pilate. How dare you ask me this question? He could have asked that question. And then he says at one point, you would have no authority over me unless it was handed over to you by God. So Jesus, at that point, is recognizing the authority that Pilate has is given by God. It's a hard thing to do. Matthew chapter 23, you can see Jesus goes on a tirade against scribes and Pharisees. 8 woes, just basically condemning them for what whitewashed tomb, you hypocrites. All of this he says. But you know how that chapter starts with? Before he gets into this tirade of anger, in a way, against scribes and Pharisees, it starts by Jesus saying this. The scribes and Pharisees are seated on the chair of Moses. So do what they tell you to do. but don't do what they do. That's a different thing. But do what they tell you. He gives them respect because they have a positional authority. Now, this is a hard thing to do, especially in a congregational church. Because congregational church, by nature, we are all bosses, right? We are all equal. And we believe in the priesthood of all believers. So it's very difficult when we make some decision, and especially our elders are working very hard. And I'm just amazed by some of our elders and deacons working way more than some of the staff does for all of this. And then people ask questions of, why did you do this? No, we don't like this. And I should be doing, this should be done in a better way. And which is all true. They are fallible human beings, including myself, right? And sometimes I feel like asking the same question. They ask me certain things, and as a senior pastor, I subject to their authority. And sometimes I feel that I know better than them. Sometimes I want to ask them, by the way, did you know that I went to seminary for 7 years? I could have, the money I paid to seminary, I could have bought a house somewhere here. I worked in 4 different countries. You know that? I know some of the things I say, but sometimes, even though I don't agree with them, I subject to their authority because I know they mean well. I know God has appointed them over me. That is an authority God and the congregation has vested on them. It doesn't mean that they are smarter than all of us. So the point I'm trying to make is the balance between the heavenly authority and the earthly responsibility, fitting ourselves to the confinement. All our authority God has given to us should be exercised within the framework of earthly responsibility God has given to us. And again, the only thing I want to mention today is the mystery of hiddenness, in a way. Right? There's that famous verse, Psalm 91. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide in the shadows of Almighty. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High. See, the part of the calling is, if God calls you with an assignment, the first thing He does is He is going to keep you. He is going to draw you to His secret place, which is full of shadows. That is the opposite of what we want, right? When God calls us, we want to go to the limelight, not to the shadows. We want to go to the public place, not to the secret place. But that is the mystery of God's calling. Unless we meet God in a secret place, we are not entitled to meet people in the marketplace. We can wait to go out and do ministry, especially with the social media. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry has an opinion. Everybody has a ministry. Everybody wants to speak. Everybody wants to be in limelight. But God, if He calls you, the first thing He does is call you into His secret place. Starting with the story of Joseph. Joseph had this amazing dream which he had in Technicolor court, and he is going to be this big guy. But what happened? He had to go through pit. And he had to go to prison, and he was in a secret place, kept hidden for long. Isn't that what happened to David? We see story of David and Goliath. Whoa, what a great story, what a champion, and the anointing of God on him. Did he become the king right away? No, he was hunted. He was chased. He even had to pretend like a madman. All this development heck, what we call. Until God says, light, camera, action. Now you go and rule. Isn't that what happened to Moses? Moses, for the first 40 years of his life, he was the prince of Egypt. He ruled the known world at the time. But the next 40 years, he was in the desert tending the sheep of his father-in-law. Lost his purpose, everybody thought. He didn't know what he was doing. Completely in darkness. That is how it feels like when you are in the secret place of the Most High. That is how it feels like when you are in the shadows of Almighty. And then comes the burning bush. Moses heard the word light, camera, action. What can we do as we go through this hiddenness, which is a gift from God to us? And Jesus gives an example. This is what Jesus said. He was both listening to them and asking them questions. The first thing Jesus does is listening. Jesus had to listen, really, right? Yeah, Jesus was listening. And again, asking questions is a beautiful thing. And one of my first sermons I preached, God loves asking questions. You can ask questions, but first you need to listen. You know, I get a lot of emails, people ask me questions. I love those people who ask me questions. But some people ask questions without listening to what I'm saying. They just love asking questions. There are some students always, right? But you first listen and then ask questions. That's exactly what Jesus was doing. And the way I think about it, it is like that's what an ideal prayer is. What is prayer, by the way? When we say, I am praying, what does that mean? We always think about teaching God and giving him instruction. These are the stuff we need to take care of. Okay, God, I'll tell you what's happening with the fire relief. I'll tell you what Lake Avenue is involved. And these are some of the things, okay? Just go and do it. Ask, get your angels or whoever. Do this, right? That's what we do. This is the exact opposite. He was listening and asking questions. That's exactly what prayer means. Prayer means listen. We are listening. There is something about praying in the secret place, in the hiddenness, when nobody knows who you are. People look at you, you're still a carpenter. Who are you? Nobody cares. This is what you do every day, the carpenter, right? Chiseling and cutting, and you are just a nobody. But that's when you listen. That's when you listen, and then you ask questions. Very often people ask, Pastor Mathew, how long it takes you to preach a sermon? Somebody asked me last week, how did you come up with that sermon? I was sharing the entire family history of King Herod, and somebody was saying, you were articulating it in such a way that you were actually part of Herod's family, And I'm like, that's not a compliment, man. My family is not like Herod's family. But the point is that, do you think that I came up with last week? Do you think that I came up with last year? I was in my early 20s. I remember reading a book called Nation in Training, and that's one of the first time I fell in love with history. This was a lot of years in the making. Each of my sermons kind of percolate at least around 10 to 20 years. But in the hiddenness, I was trying to listen. I didn't have a platform. Nobody asked me to preach. Nobody cared. Nobody even knew that I existed. I was sitting in this church 12 years, 2012, when I walked in. I was sitting there for a long time. Then I thought, I'm putting the money in the basket anyway. I need a better seat. So I came here. These people are smart, right? So I was sitting here. Nobody knew I existed. It doesn't matter. But I was listening. I was asking questions. Most of the sermons came like 12 years ago. What I'm saying is that don't be dismayed by the hiddenness. And some of you are being prepared. And some of you are going through this development heck. And what you see in Los Angeles is that one day you will see a mega movie star, and then you will think that, isn't that person who was serving me coffee at Starbucks? Wasn't the person who was driving Uber? That's exactly what happens in Los Angeles, right? Some of these baristas you serve coffee, tomorrow they might become mega stars. You will never know. Some of these guys who are driving Uber, they will be the best director, Oscar stage next year. That's what happens in the city of Los Angeles, because even in the hiddenness, they are working on their craft. Even when nobody looks at them, they are trying to memorize their lines. They are focusing their camera. They are getting the set ready. And they're waiting for that one sentence, light, camera, action. Then they leave their Starbucks, then they leave their Uber car and go and act, because they are getting prepared. Now, some of you are going through that development heck. And I know some of you think that you are an unfinished script. And I know some of you think that you are in the dark room of a studio. Nobody notices you. But the Son of God himself had to go through that stage. Jesus had to be hidden 10 years for every 1 year of his ministry. He ministered 3 years, for which he had to be hidden for 30 years. So how many more years should you be hidden? If Jesus himself had to go through 10 years for every 1 year of development, how much more development we all have to go through? So I just want to encourage you today. I invite the worship team back. In this hiddenness, don't think that you are lost. Don't think you are lost. Always ask, always listen. What is my Father's business? That's the priority. Where am I? I am in my Father's house. I'm listening to what my Father is asking me to do. My story finds meaning. My life finds meaning when my Father, I become part of this drama written, directed, and produced by my Father. That's when I find meaning for my life. Now, Jesus was not lost in the temple. You know, Jesus cannot be lost in the temple because Jesus himself was the temple. Jesus said, destroy this temple. Destroy this temple. I will raise it up in 3 days. And he was talking about his own body. He was the temple. He was never lost in the temple. His broken temple is what brought true worship to humanity. His broken body is what brought true redemption to us. And today, we are going to celebrate this. And I remember as a child reading a picture book and a story about Jesus at the temple at 12, the same thing in a picture book. And I was 12 years old at that time, so it clicked very well at that time because Jesus was my age. And in that picture book, they portrayed this very fictive, very imaginative, metaphorical depiction of the story, and according to which the portrayal was that Jesus, 12 years old, go to the temple for Passover, and the Passover festival is happening, and they are sacrificing the Passover lamb. At that time, Jesus looks at the Passover lamb. 12-year-old boy Jesus looks at the Passover lamb and recognizes that I am that Passover lamb. You remember, our Passover lamb has been offered, and that lamb is Christ. That's what Paul says. And even at the age 12, the shadow of the cross was looming over him. And I remember reading that story, and it hit me so hard. And that's one of the first time I fell in love with the scripture and the meaning of it. And today, we are going back to the table, the broken temple that drew the whole world to him. This is not for Jewish people. This is not for Gentiles. This is not just for a particular segment. And this is for all of us, the body of Christ broken for us, the blood of Christ being shed for us. Now, can I invite you, as we draw near the cross, I'm going to invite you to come to the front. You know how this is done by now since you've been here enough. Exit to the left, come forward, and re-enter right. And if you want gluten-free bread, that will be on that side. If anybody needs help, please raise your hand. We can reach out the elements to you. We can bring the elements to you. And also, please hold on to your elements so that we can have this together. Let's go near the cross.